No one was reported hurt in either assault, but the back-and-forth attacks are viewed as a dangerous and aggressive military tit-for-tat. Iran's massive missile barrage was in retaliation against Israel for an airstrike April 1st in Syria that killed 2 Iranian generals inside an Iranian consular building. Israel's attack Friday morning, its response. To discuss the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran and the larger dangers that could be posed for this region, we're joined by Andrew Doran. Andrew served on the policy planning staff at the U.S. Department of State and was co-founder of the group In Defense of Christians. He is an Army veteran, attorney, and expert on anti-Semitism and the Middle East. Andrew is a senior fellow at the Philos Project. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a step back. We just reported on the Israeli military attack on Iran early on Friday, a more muted response to what now some are calling a military exercise the weekend of April 13th when Iran struck Israel with significant force. Does it seem that de-escalation is actually possible? Both sides have been characterized as merely threatening with their potential abilities to strike.
Thank you, Montse. The real more recent history that should be examined here is the last 15 years or so in the Middle East. There has been what the Israelis call shorthand Operation Chess, that since the Arab Spring, the beginning of the Syrian civil war, they began a series of quasi-kinetic limited strikes using airstrikes, missile strikes, precision guided munition strikes against Iranian and Hezbollah targets in Syria, inside Syria. Iran's goal is to get missiles, which are very difficult to get to Israel across over 2,000 kilometers of terrain without being shot down, much closer. That's why they want missiles in Gaza. That's why they want missiles in particular in the south of Lebanon. So Syria was an opportunity for both sides to establish ground rules, so to speak, for limited engagements. And so instead of a full-blown war like we saw in 2006, what we've seen even here between Iran and Hezbollah on the one side and Israel on the other are a series of limited strikes with much possibility for escalation. There's a lot of room for, much room for escalation on both sides. We haven't really even begun to see what a serious war between these parties would look like.
Well, it seems that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority have taken a back seat to what you're describing as this potential escalation. However, prospects of a ceasefire really shouldn't be overlooked. The latest proposal for the release of Israeli hostages, which was put forth by Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, was again rejected. Is there any prospect of a ceasefire now that it would seem that the main Israeli military goal of getting rid of the terrorist leadership has been accomplished?
Well, Gaza has always been something of a sideshow. Certainly October 7th was a very serious incursion. It was a terrible terrorist event within Israel's sovereign borders. But Hamas was never the threat that Iran and Hezbollah are, and the threat of a wider regional war would never have begun from Gaza. So as this conflict and potentially some brinksmanship diplomacy begins to shift away from Gaza and toward Iran and Hezbollah, you'll begin to see the coalition, the anti-Israel coalition, especially in the region, that is opposed to what they regard as the Israelis going too far militarily to root out Hamas. You'll begin to see that coalition start to look a little bit more complicated because the majority of Sunni Islam, the majority of Islam is Sunni, about 85% to 15% Shia. Shia interests have been spread across the region by Iran and too often tied to terrorist affiliates like Hezbollah and more recently the Houthis. So the partnership with Hamas was much more tactical. The real high stakes war that could be on the horizon is between Israel, Iran, and Hezbollah.
The U.S. seems to be playing 3D chess, though, calling for a ceasefire and at the same time vetoing the UN resolution this week to give full member state recognition to Palestine. Is the fear of giving recognition driven by some of what you just mentioned, the actions of Hamas, etc.?
Yes, and I'm not at the UN in New York, thankfully, but I can tell you that I really doubt that resolution would have gotten very far if people hadn't been certain that the U.S. was going to veto it. In other words, this is a very cynical play that's very good for headlines. But the truth of the matter is, and this is what everyone on the ground knows and understands very well, and in the region they understand this very well. If Israel pulls out of the West Bank, there will immediately be a civil war between Islamic Jihad and Hamas on the one side and the Palestinian Authority on the other. And most of the polls say that in the West Bank, the popular support by a clear majority would go to Islamic Jihad and Hamas over the Palestinian Authority. That's a quaint way of saying that it's the IDF and Israel that keeps the Palestinian Authority in many instances in a position of authority there. So what does a Palestinian state mean, if not immediate civil war and further destabilizing in the region?
Well, we're going to continue to monitor this developing story. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.